than that. Spitting opinions rooted in facts. Hope you aware the culture is bigger than plats. Used to be a summit, now we got a podcast. Gave you something you wouldn't know you wanted. Black American podcast, Black American podcast. You might hear something.
Welcome to our last panel of the evening. I am so excited to have you all here with us. How are y'all doing tonight?
Doing great, thank you.
Great.
Wow.
Awesome. This is going to be an amazing panel and a great conversation to finish our 4-week summit. So I will begin with reading the panel description. This is our DEI and Corporate Workplace Part 2. We did this panel last year, so this is our Part 2. Last year we had Netflix, Disney, Third Sector, and Roc Nation join us to discuss the efforts of top corporations to create safe workplaces for Black American employees. And we're checking in with corporations and companies this year to see how have you all translated the needs of Black employees over the last year and to continue to create safer work environments. I have 3 phenomenal panelists with me, but first, let me introduce myself because I always forget that. I go straight into like the good stuff, you all, and I forget to say who I am. I am Rielle Jones. I created Black America Summit last year in response to how Black mortality was being portrayed with COVID and wanting to create a line of communication for Black Americans and our allies to talk to subject matter experts, industry leaders like yourself, because normally we don't really have as much access to you all, especially for free, without a paywall. So I'm excited to have you all join us. We're going to start with Corey Jones. He is the co-founder of Prism Work. And Corey Jones brings over 20 years of leadership in the creative and digital media industry to this conversation. As a creative leader, he's worked with breakthrough technology and consumer brands to craft relevant messages. His journey through corporate America allowed him to work with decision makers at companies like HP, PetSmart, Tequila, Patron Tequila, and PepsiCo, which we will let that slide today. I am from Atlanta. I'm from Decatur, where it's greater. Biased to Coca-Cola, but okay.
Well, I hail from North Texas, and PepsiCo is in the region here, along with Dr. Pepper.
FedEx, Lexus, Adobe, and so much more. He's currently proud to be the co-founder of Prism Work, a consultancy focused on cultural transformation in the workplace, so very relevant to today's conversation. We also have Mr. Michael Moore. He is a high-impact business and community leader, a board member, keynote speaker, and author, i.e. he does it all. He knows it all. And he is a thought leader on diversity and inclusion, social justice, African-American history, and brand strategy. He has degrees from Syracuse and Duke University, and he is currently the Diversity and Inclusion Officer at Blackball, the world's leading software company powering the global social good community. And we have Dede, Orica Cecile. Did I say your last name?
Orica Cecile. That was pretty good. Yes.
Oh, and I've been practicing. I'm good at butchering up the name. I do it with such zest.
I was nervous actually for you, so that's perfect.
You're like, oh, how's this gonna come out? Dede is amazing. She leads Egon. Okay, now I'm gonna have to have your help.
Egon Zender. Egon
Zender's diversity, equity, and inclusion practice in the U.S. She is also a member of the firm's board, CEO, and leadership advisory practices. She consults on a wide range of talent acquisition and leadership solutions to help meet the challenges that many of her clients face as they seek to build and lead best-in-class organizations. Dede earned a JD from Columbia University School of Law, so please put some respect to her name. She has a master's degree in global health and development from Yale University and a BA in art from Williams College. Thank you all. That's a mouthful, but that just means y'all are very qualified for this conversation, perhaps overly qualified, which is great. And so I would like to begin the panel with an umbrella question, which I'm reading it back. I'm like, okay, this could have been a good second question, but we'll start with it. We'll keep it as our umbrella question. It's controversial. Is DEI still important in corporate America today? And in this, I would like to hear like why not? Perhaps I'll start with Corey since I introduced you first.
Sure. It's a great question, right? At Prism Work, the way we define DEI is through 21st century leadership, and in that you cannot achieve leadership at the 21st century level without a true understanding of inclusivity and creating and maintaining environments that encourage confidence, creativity, constructive change for everyone, and where everyone prospers. With all the mess that people at the margins have experienced, especially Black folks, at the consequence of poor and destructive leadership of American capitalists, focusing on the needs of women, people of color, LGBTQ, and indigenous people is long overdue. Leaders are still fumbling over bad practices from before the 19th and 20th centuries, and corporate leaders' visions for their people have to elevate and fundamentally shift how they consider and interact with employees. And for us, DE&I is table stakes. It's what you have to have mastered to get through the door of true 21st century leadership. So it is extremely important because we're still struggling with these challenges from centuries before.
And Michael?
Yeah, I think DE&I is even more important now than in the past. I mean, first of all, it's simply the right thing to do. Let's just say that. And sometimes companies have a hard time of acknowledging the moral element of this. Corporations and morality, oftentimes there's some tension there, perhaps. I didn't say that, but perhaps. And so I think it's the right thing to do. Secondly, I think, the world is only getting smaller in the sense that technology, like the technology we're using right at this moment, is bringing people together far more easily with less sort of drag and difficulty. And so as people from around the world find themselves doing business with each other, aspects of inclusion and sort of the benefits of diversity come into play. And then look, from a business standpoint, there's all kinds of really compelling research from the likes of McKinsey and Deloitte and Gallup and others that just lay it out and say that there is a hard financial benefit to organizations that can figure out how to do D&I really well, that they can do. So all things being equal, your product or service is the same, your marketing spend, everything else is the same. If you can figure out how to do D&I well, you will have at times up to a third benefit over the competitors who haven't figured it out. So, I don't think diversity is going anywhere. I think the world is, as I said, getting smaller. And so I think it's imperative that organizations, that companies really lean into this and embrace it because it's to their benefit to do so.
And Dede?
Well, I mean, I'm not sure what else I can add except for, well, actually, there is something. Yes, it's important. And I think you had phrased it as kind of even in the last year, right? Is it still important? I would say it is still important, but it doesn't mean that the energy, the commitment, the determination, the advocacy is at the same levels, right? If you look at the last year, and I suspect, this topic, we all know on this screen, we all know that this isn't a new topic, right? We also know that it's like these things are nodal, and we're hopeful that right now we'll be able to kind of sustain momentum, interest, and investment, right? Because it is important. But I will say the reality is that, there's also some fatigue that I hear from clients, right? And for what it's worth, heightened attention came to this topic at a time where we were also quite focused on a global pandemic.
Yeah.
And in some ways, you're watching almost kind of, at least I'm hearing, not from everyone, but I am hearing this kind of up and down in terms of just people being tired in general, And therefore, now kind of these competing interests and how do I spend my time, particularly in a corporate setting? What do I invest in? We have a lot, also the reality for many, right? That work is not there. This isn't quick fix work, right? And so I would definitely say that there's acknowledgement of the importance. And perhaps I think there's also kind of for some a realization that if we're going to make commitments and make these investments, this requires kind of sustained, it just requires sustained effort.
Yeah.
And so anyway.
I think you brought up a really good point. When I started Black America Summit last year, I was chief of staff for a team of 200. And at that point, we were having conversations around protest and, all this stuff, Black Lives Matter, like all this was everywhere. We had statements being put up. And then like over the year, you kind of see like, we were going to do this project, but we're a little booked right now. So we're not going to do this project right now. Hopefully no one notices this. But like, it wasn't that we weren't still having some conversations. It was just like the fatigue. And like, also we had business like to keep going. And it was like, how do we keep that intensity of how much we were meeting and talking about these topics and, actually do our jobs in the business?
It's real. I think it's real, right? And I mean, some of the conversations. So our firm, we do a lot. I mean, the reason I talk, we spend a lot of time, obviously, talking to senior executives about this issue. And I found that a lot of the conversations up front, you had a split. You had some companies that have been doing this work for a long time, and you have companies that for the first time are waking up and thinking, oh my gosh. And the answer ranges from, let's look at our programs, let's look at our structure, let's look at incentives, let's just find somebody. Can you help us find a chief diversity officer to fix everything, right? You saw that range, right? And so that meant there was also kind of a range in terms of understanding what you're getting into and what this work requires in order to have the sustained impact, And so for some, they're just starting to kind of feel that.
Yeah, I definitely feel that. Did anyone want to add anything to that before I delve into the questions?
Well, I don't know if we might be going to where some of the questions may lead, but I like where we are now, right? There are a number of companies who, along with their black squares and their proclamations publicly, some of them actually pledged dollars, but no true account of where those dollars went, how they got distributed. And there are a number of companies, as Dede just said, that have been doing the work, or that woke up and said, let's dive in and be really transparent about our process that we're just starting. Let's do an audit of who we have on our rosters, who's in leadership. How do we build? There's one client in particular that really worked this last year to build a cohort for Black and Brown young people leaders, to how they can be elevated and have their points of view considered. And they're continuing. So that's the thing, is they didn't just make this statement at the beginning of the year. They're coming back and saying, we want more. We want to expand our vision of what diversity means. And that is refreshing. But there are a number of companies that are still resting on the laurels of the black square that they posted 18 months ago. And that just ain't
Isn't that good enough? We did something. Social media team don't like persons outside of our branding guidelines. That was different.
Right.
So we've been talking a little bit, kind of foreshadowing the conversation. But before we go too deep into it, I would like for you all to define what DEI is to you all, and kind of how are y'all working towards this goal of DEI in your roles? Because I think it's very broad, and I've realized over the last year, I bring it up like, oh yeah, they're in DEI, and there'll be other people like, what is that? I know what diversity and inclusion is. What's the what's the
E? What is it? Is it? Yeah.
Yeah.
I know that tends to be. I mean, that actually tends to be a conversation that kind of we start a lot often. When people are saying we want to do this work or we want a strategy. Should it be diversity, equity, and inclusion? Should it be diversity, inclusion, and belonging? Should it be JEDI? Should we have justice, equity? You get wrapped up in that. And so this goes to what it means to me, which is it's important because actually words do matter, and if you're going to put, and you hold your, a lawyer, so words matter.
Yeah.
But at the same time, the spirit of it, to me, I don't want the spirit of it to get lost in trying. For me, the spirit is creating inclusive spaces for all humans, right? And there are some boundaries, but the boundaries are the same boundaries that we all have to live in a society where we protect and where we're safe, right? But outside of that, we're trying to create inclusive spaces for human beings. And I think that, unfortunately, for some, that to remind people kind of what it means to be a human being, right? And that's almost like day 1, day 2, day 3, which is right now we happen to be in a moment, right, where a light is shining on a few different groups, but that's right now. 10 years from now, that light's going to be shining on someone else. And so for me, what it means is, what are the practices? What are the behaviors? What structures are we, if we're talking about in the corporate setting, what structures are we putting into place? Policies? What transparency are we putting into place so that, right now the light may be on me and I will benefit, but if I really believe in this work, that light's going to shine on somebody else and these structures should benefit. So that's
I like that.
one person's point of view.
Wholeheartedly agree.
Yep.
Wholeheartedly agree that it is about creating these places of belonging where everyone can thrive. Everyone has the opportunity to be creative and curious and prosper, right? We look at 21st century leadership through these 6 traits. Most people might think decision-making or charisma or performance management as leadership skills, which they are, but we focus on 6, and we call it HARDY, which is humility, empathy, accountability, resiliency, transparency, and inclusivity. With all of these working together is how you can build these spaces that Dede was talking about, because you have a more inclusive point of view and you're understanding how to be more empathetic and accountable to the people you're leading. Everyone was challenged in this past 18 months through COVID, and everyone was required to have a bit of grace for the people that they're working with. And we were all challenged to be inclusive, right? It's one of those unique moments where, as Dede said, like the next challenge will come, and we're focused. There's a light on identity and gender and a lot of places in the workspace, but COVID expose all of these different areas of gap and need in our workforce, and how we can be more empathetic leaders for them, how we can enable them to do their best work on their time, in their best environment. And that through that challenge, you have to have a hardy standpoint. You have to be humble. You have to be empathetic. You have to be accountable to, are people going to come back into the office? How resilient are you as a group? And how transparent are you? Is everyone going to be tested? Is everyone going to have the vaccine? How are you communicating to your employees to help them navigate how they're going to do? Are they going to move to a different city? Or are they able to, or do they need to stay where they are? Being a transparent leader and an inclusive leader with all of it allows you to set the stage for your employees to make the best decision for themselves.
Inclusion was challenged in my household, I will say, and I'm not sure what I had some moments where I have 4 children and they wanted to be included on every Zoom, and
oh, bless you and bless them.
There was a little bit of like, I'm practicing one thing and saying, but this space isn't for you right now. No.
Michael.
Yeah, I'll dive in. For us, we're a sort of global software company striving to be even bigger and even more global. And so I think, we buy what the research tells us, that when you can bring together diverse groups of people who have really different perspectives and expertise and just worldviews, that if you can create a platform where, a platform of inclusivity where everyone feels like they belong, where everyone feels like their contributions are valued, then I think you unlock just enormous amounts of productivity, of innovation, of real, sort of magical thinking. And so that's what I think we are trying to do. it's a challenge. Most people kind of grow up with people who are similar to them, and work may be the first time that many people have ever been forced to kind of interact with people who might be different than they are. And so I think what we're trying to do is just create a sense of awareness and provide tools to our employees to empower them to leverage diversity in ways that can be, of benefit to all. And I think that again, as Dede was saying, there are a lot of kind of acronyms and things, and we are focused on all of them. Ultimately, kind of we wrap it up in sort of just a D&I, but certainly equity, ensuring that all employees have equal access to resources and to opportunity is critically important. So,
I like that. I like the idea of everybody having access to opportunities and it not being, because I know traditionally, even in the last panel, we talked about some employees feeling like there's like glass ceilings, or that they can't progress up to certain roles and things like that. So I think that's really important as we start to talk about DE&I. And
yes, let me just interject, because again, part of what I tell people all the time is glass ceilings don't really serve anybody.
Yeah.
If business is a very competitive endeavor, obviously, and it's like tug of war. And so if you've got a team of people on your side of the rope pulling, and some people can only give a certain percentage, less than 100%, then you are by definition, kind of retarding the overall productivity of your group, of your team, of your organization. And so, particularly in public organizations where profit sharing and the like are important, like everybody needs to be empowered so that everybody can benefit from the diversity. And again, oftentimes people who look like us are advocating for these kinds of things. Yeah. But, diversity and inclusion, doing it well, benefits everybody. It benefits everybody in an organization.
Yeah, definitely. And this kind of segues us into my next question. And that's around like the work environment. And I'm thinking about how, what is like a hostile work environment, and how does DEI help create a safe work environment? I will try to bridge the two thoughts that I'm having around what Michael just said, because I'm thinking how employees who feel comfortable and they feel like they belong and they can really do their work, I feel like bring all their full selves to their job and their creativity, whatever it is, like, versus if it's a hostile work environment, then you're closing off portions of yourself, or you're just trying to get the job done. Like I've personally been there where I'm like, okay, this is what I'm going through. Let me just put my head down and get through this. And then I had feedback like, oh, well, before you were giving these great ideas, we're using this, this, and this. And it's like, well, I don't feel connected to that part because I don't feel safe here, and delving deeper into that. So that's kind of where I'm going into like the next question of asking what is a hostile work environment and how can DEI help create safe work environments? And anybody can take this.
I mean, I'll just jump in really quickly because I think you answered the question, right? I think if someone's in an environment where they don't feel like they belong, where they don't feel like they can be their authentic selves, where they don't feel like their contributions are really valued, then they're not going to be able to do their best, or they're certainly not going to bend over backwards in that kind of a situation. And so, and some environments may not even be hostile or caustic, but they just might be indifferent to differences, and thereby make people who are different, feel like they don't quite fit in. And so that's where I think, the huge benefit, first of all, you've got to have, to gain the benefit of all this, you've got to have diverse folks on your teams. And that's, a recruiting and talent acquisition challenge for lots of organizations. But then you've also got to work on your corporate culture on your organizational culture to make sure that once you have those people who might be different, who might bring different angles and different perspectives that can help, sort of the overall productivity, you've got to then, ensure that they feel comfortable, sort of doing that. I'll just give you a quick little story. I had a consulting company. I was I had a boutique brand strategy firm for a long time. And I started a little sub practice where I intentionally brought in people, mostly friends of mine, but from very different backgrounds. We had a sort of a quick serve kind of a consulting practice where we went in, were presented with lots of information on a problem or a strategy challenge or something, processed it really quickly, and then delivered it back. And the group, I would bring in people who didn't know anything about brand strategy, physicists, financial person, English, person. But I brought in these people, all of whom knew me. We all knew each other. We all trusted each other. And people knew that even though they might not know anything specific to the problem at hand, they knew how to ask questions. They knew how to solve problems, and they knew how to listen and process information. And so we created this really dynamic interaction. And so on a very short, sort of small basis, I've lived kind of the benefit of D&I and seen how it works.
And the trust was there. Let's add that too. Like
that's what made it. Yeah, that's what made it work. Is because that physicist, didn't feel like, okay, like I really don't know what they're talking about, but I have this thought, he felt totally empowered to just say, well, hey, what do we think about this? Yeah. And it worked.
Corey, Dede, do you have any thoughts on how D&I can help create safe work environments versus hostile work environments?
It gives
sure.
Oh, go ahead.
Go, Dede. Go.
It gives us I don't know. I feel as though I hear discussions more and more, inviting conversations around psychological safety in the workplace and what that means. And actually, for some, there are different degrees of when we're talking about that environment, right? To some degree, there's some people who feel concerned about some sort of backlash, right? Some sort of, is for being themselves and kind of having the negative consequences of actually, because of stereotypes that come along with, what you might be doing that might cause some backlash. And how do you create a space, again, going back to this notion of trust and actually kind of a lack of fear, right? Feeling as though it's not just that you're going to have a space to speak, but that there isn't going to be some sort of retaliation or and then in the best case scenario that your thoughts and points are taken into consideration and really absorbed. So I think this time and with DEI, it's actually opened and invited a conversation around that, right? And what does it mean to have that space? The other thing I wanted to note is this notion of, we spend a lot of time trying to bring all these different voices and a unique, everybody wants to bring somebody in who has unique experience and a unique, background and unique, and then they come in and I'm sure you've heard of this concept of like, there's like the only, like, and then you come in and you're like, oh my gosh, I come in and nobody else is like me. Right. And wait, I'm the only one, I'm the only one here who I don't know. There's lots of ways to be only. However, what I'm finding is actually a distinction, and again, this conversation and this tension with DEI, which actually can find the good pieces of being that and saying, no, there are some things that are unique to a whole set of experiences you bring. We want to make sure that we're optimizing and kind of making sure that you can bring that fully. We just don't want you to make you feel like you're an other.
Yeah.
Right. We don't want you to feel, and so having those conversations, particularly with senior executives, with managers, right, people who are now responsible for bringing in, for developing, for creating opportunities, having those conversations at that level so that they understand the implications of certain behaviors. So I think DEI gives a window and a platform, or really talking about inclusive leadership, gives people the opportunity to have conversations like this and become aware of things that they may or may not be doing to create an environment that's actually mental.
You actually made me think of I don't want to say it's a stereotype, but like a running joke that I heard before I got into the workforce. And then once I was in the workforce, it was actually kind of true of why are more than two Black people together? Like, I can't think of like the wording
It's
for
like,
the joke.
why I was like, yeah.
Yeah, more than two of us together, then it's something. And I remember like always hearing it in the
like
they're up to something. They're in cahoots. Like something's about to happen. And like I was like, oh, that's just crazy. But then when I entered the workforce, I noticed like people really being like, hey, it's just you and me talking. We can't all have lunch together. We can't all like, wow, this is crazy. But it creates that environment. And I'm sure most of the white employees aren't actively thinking that all the Black people are trying not to congregate together because it's going to make a scene or whatever. But like you said, there are things that aren't spoken and, you know, that leadership can think about when you do have people, other voices in the room and a part of the conversation. Corey. Yep.
I'll just say that I've been at places where that has been said out loud, right?
Oh.
As a joke, right?
Oh, yeah.
It's like, oh, you know, all the Black people is something a brew, is something afoot.
What are y'all doing in here?
Yeah, what's going on? And so it's not just us talking about this stuff. It is hinted at, intimated, and so it becomes a thing. It's part of that underlying subculture, right? Even if I can say it as a just joke. But what's so interesting is that point of conversation always comes up, the minorities that group together, but no one ever turns the light the other way and say, look at all these white tables, look at all these rooms with all white folks in here, or all white men.
By this lunch table, what's going on?
Right, exactly. And so it's when you focus on that you start to understand, wow, there's a whole paradigm that needs to shift. And honestly, Black people are congregating because for support in this a life raft in this hostile, more than likely hostile environment. And I think, let's be clear, I think to really prove a hostile work environment, it has to be discriminatory of a long period, not investigated, and it's impossible for you to do your work. And so who determines it's impossible? And I think Dede touched on it very well when we think about psychological safety of how do your individual coworkers, how psychologically safe do they feel doing their work with you and the people around you? And sometimes it is also just building rapport. It's not necessarily a hostile work environment, but as Michael so eloquently talked about his startup and the friends and the trust that they have, as leaders, we have to take that extra effort to build rapport with these people that we're just meeting, with these people that we're onboarding, that come from different places, don't look like us. When you build that rapport, when you make that connection, it allows people to say, hey, I have psychological safety to not only just be myself and belong, but to, as you started this, Rielle, to say, I feel comfortable offering, added value and ideas and thoughts to the discussion because I feel like this is a place that's safe, that I belong, and that my ideas will hold credit and be valued.
I'm sorry. I was about to say something else and I lost my train of thought. I'm sorry. But I do appreciate that. What are like some examples of positive DEI like in action? I know, Corey, you started to talk about this before, like different strategies companies have been using over the last year. What are some strategies that you all have seen? It doesn't have to be in your company. It could be just in the industry that you're like, wow, they actually got it and they did this really well. Like a company, like and thinking about a DEI initiative that they started perhaps over the last year or so, 18 months.
Well, I'll just jump in really quickly. I think to be successful, to do this well, you have to be intentional about it. And I think that's where you start, at least. And so much of a lack of inclusion is just the fact that people aren't thinking about anybody who's not like them. And therefore you end up with not that many of those people in your organization, and you're not thinking about what, not only sort of how they might experience your organization differently, but also what they might be able to add that you're not, sort of ordinarily getting. I think, obviously creating awareness and training and look, inclusion is all about moving hearts and minds. It's about getting people to think differently and then act differently. I'm a huge proponent of metrics as a way to, in the same way that you would manage and guide any other aspect of an organization, a business, using metrics, whether that's sort of quantitative data from your employees that you would survey on an annual basis on how they are feeling about D&I, or whether it's looking at just raw demographic numbers in your organization, whether it's looking at key roles in leadership and tracking, how things are going. I think there's a lot of tactics that organizations can adopt, embrace, but at the end of the day, is your leadership, have they sort of bought into this? Have they embraced this? Are they creating incentives and holding other senior managers accountable for this? And are you tracking numbers in a way to let you know how you're doing? That's kind of at a really, really high level.
Yeah. Dede, Corey. And you don't have to if you don't.
I mean, it's a tough spot. It's almost like you're asking, who do we give a gold star to? Last year,
a good conversation this year.
And while there's been some great efforts, and we have wonderful clients who are taking this journey. Some have been on it for a while and have invited us in, and some others are starting to do this work and doing workshops on what does it mean, like taking men's cohorts, and what does it mean what does allyship mean? What does it truly mean to mentor, sponsor, and advocate for non-men, for women and LGBTQ people in the workplace? How do you build rapport with teams? We worked with the Snow Sports Industries of America to have a series of workshops and built a playbook on how they could make the slopes more inclusive. I'm not a big skier or winter sports person, but they are really opening up the slopes for people. And they said, hey, we want to know what that means to be more inclusive. I'll call out Netflix, not one of our clients. I think they're doing a wonderful job of elevating Black executives and hiring more people. I see on LinkedIn every now and then in my network, someone else has joined the Netflix team, and that's exciting. However, on the flip side of that, there's some areas of growth too. The CEO still talks about wanting people to come into the office. Believe that, Netflix, where we watch videos, they want people to come to the office. It makes no sense. So in the area of like COVID and the new world of work and hybrid workplace, there are some people, while they might be getting DE&I right in that sense, when it comes to the new challenges that we're facing, they're falling short. They're still trying to fall into the old paradigms, which affects Black and brown people disproportionately, rushing people back unvaccinated into the office without safe spaces. That is detrimental to the community of all of their constituents. And so while there's a great amount of effort and wonderful things to celebrate, we're in a quandary because there's still some of those same mistakes or those same challenges hold us back.
Yeah, we actually had someone respond that their leadership is focused on promoting minority leaders positions. They do get there, they still don't know how to deal with the minority leaders now. So like thinking about this, how can corporations start to prepare themselves? And I know that we have all gone through the unconscious bias trainings at this point. So like without saying we're going to throw them through another one of those classes, how can we try to like actually make the leadership roles safe for minority, but right now we're talking about Black Americans, so Black employees who are getting pulled into these higher roles, and before there wasn't any space for them in that leadership circle.
I was actually going to comment on that, and what some companies are doing, and the kind of tension between wanting to have, what doesn't get measured doesn't get done. You've heard that, right? Mm-hmm. And so you want to have, I think you want to set a course, you want to set a direction, and companies are still trying to figure out the best ways to hold people accountable, right? Along those, right? At the same time, sometimes, you have the example, I won't say which one, but like there are some large global financial institutions, for example, that have given financial incentives to executives for diversifying their teams through recruitment. However, incentives, what that resulted in was an influx of, you know, candidates, employees from underrepresented groups without much attention to then what happens when you get there. So everybody was doing their part to recruit, and not thinking, so that goes to this point, but not thinking about what's the experience going to be like when you get there.
Yeah.
And therefore, what happens is a year from now, 2 years from now, they're gone. Right? And the executive has that year bonus that they got for doing it, but the person's gone. So that's success. The question is, and so what I have seen, in addition to kind of companies really trying to think through the whole life cycle, an employee that comes into an organization, what's the experience, what are the touch points, how do they contribute to it? Companies are thinking that way and trying to be more holistic. And some companies are really focused on inclusive coaching, so inclusive leadership coaching. So what does that mean? It means that CEO, the COO, the C-suite, and maybe C-1 starting there, who have dedicated time, right? That is time that they are like committed to weekly or monthly, what have you. They actually are doing these coaching sessions, right? Because the idea is, let's figure this out with you. You're going to then practice with your team. You're gonna do this with your leaders. Your leaders will do it with their leaders, and what have you. So you're hoping for this kind of cascade, if you will, of actually shifting behaviors around leadership. You're talking about 21st century, right, leadership principles, and it's like, how do you coach for that, right? And have you actually practice and do the work. I think part of that coaching is to find ways to go back to the humanity point, having all leaders think about when they've been, kind of vulnerable, when they haven't been included, right? And actually using that and tapping into that humanity piece, and then bringing that back to how they lead in an organization. So that's something I'm seeing more. And we'll see, kind of how effective. But what happens is you need that light bulb to go off, right? See a shift in behaviors.
Absolutely. I'd also add, I think part of that, to answer the comment, some of that comes from, there's still a lot of us being the only in the room. And there are studies that show when you have more than one person of an ethnic group, 2 to 3 actually really is where you start to feel that sense of belonging and connectivity, and people feel empowered to share their ideas freely. And there's a contingent that the majority group or the legacy group has to adjust to and change to accommodate. And that's where the growth happens. That's where the push and pull of how you define the culture and how you start to evolve the culture happens. And when you isolate people, they don't feel as empowered. They don't feel as supported. So, of course, they're discarded and their views aren't heard. And it absolutely is a revolving door for Black leaders to get elevated and then say, they don't know how to treat new leaders here. They don't know how to onboard. They don't know how to navigate what a new culture means when we step into the room. I need to go somewhere else.
Yeah. I even know that firsthand of being in a leadership role in a all-white leadership team. And then once I had the role, they're like, you're not actually a leader. But we're going to give you all the same responsibilities and all of that, but we're not going to give you any of the other, like, you're not going to be on track. We're not going to include you in all of the leadership stuff, but you still have the numbers. You still have goals. You still have people you're managing, but we're not going to say you're a manager. Like, I love the team, but because the leadership wasn't prepared to have someone who wasn't white to be a part of it, it was like, we want on paper you to do this stuff, and we love that the team loves you, but somehow we can't really incorporate you fully into what we see as leadership. So I think it is important that we do continue to have these conversations, especially at senior levels, and for there to be a way, and in that company, there wasn't a way to fix it because they were above me. It would just like keep managing up. And after 6 months of trying to manage up, it was like, this is really impacting my mental health, you know? So that brings me to the next question. It's something that Michael started to bring up earlier. It's like you're doing all these statistics, you're listening to the Black employees, their feedback over the last year and a half. What are some things that you all are hearing from employees? It doesn't have to be, it could be as general as you need it to be. I don't want you to give away any of your companies, like whatever. But what are some things that you feel like Black employees generally are right now saying that they need more of from their corporations? Maybe we make it a little bit more general. Yeah. And I ask this because I feel like when I talk to other Black people, they know what other Black people are asking for right now. But when I talk to leadership, sometimes it's a little bit murky. It's like they want more equity. Like they want like, okay, what is that? What does that mean? You know, so when people are coming to you all, or you're hearing all this stuff in the news, what are you hearing? What does it translate to you as people in leadership or in this space?
Well, from the perspective of the people, what Black employees are wanting, it's the same as what I've heard before. I don't know if I'm leading to your next question, but it's a more appreciation in the form of higher salaries, better opportunities and access to leadership, and empathy from leadership. Right? It's how do we get those things from leadership, the things that they freely share amongst themselves, and with other white people. How can Black people get those same things? And now in the times of COVID, it's how to keep us safe. That would be the one difference, I think, is how do you keep us safe? But the rest of it, I don't think there's been much of a change.
I hear people visibility, like people wanting to be seen, right? And then there's some, then there's like the side comments here and there, which is, and I want them to see me, not see who they think I'm supposed to be, right? So, I don't know, I shouldn't say we've all had these, I can't speak for anybody else's experiences, but I know I've had these, and I know people have told me about these, where you have these experiences where you walk into the room for a meeting and you heard so-and-so talking to somebody else in one way, but then you walk into the meeting and all of a sudden they change how they're speaking to you, the references that they're bringing up as if they expect that, okay, because I look this way, I'm supposed to,
you gotta get the hey girlfriend.
Right. Drives me crazy. Drives me crazy.
I can't call you by your name, your girlfriend now.
Like, oh, wait a second, huh? Like, that, like, so if I'm going to be real, right, this is supposed to be a real conversation. Yeah. People are like, I want you to see past, I want you to see me. Like, but I have a lot of experiences, right? And they all matter. They all matter. So it's not like, me being a Black woman in this space is important because actually I've been in places where it's caused me to develop certain skills, and that's going to be helpful here. At the same time, I also want you to see that, I have my brain can organize chaos in a certain way because I went so people are asking for that, and they want to be seen. And it's almost like in some ways, especially if I look at the last 18 months, because there's been this like ping-ponging or kind of this like, we now have to make up quickly. People are kind of getting pulled into discussions, pulled into meetings without any thought as to kind of why you're pulling that person in. And so they fall back on simple stereotypes and ways of communicating. And to your point about your own experience, they're not really being seen for who they are. They're just kind of being seen as, now we have to fix this thing and we're going to fix it with you. Yep. Doesn't mean that they don't also still want, everybody wants that. It doesn't matter. I think everybody wants to be paid more and to be valued for your work and to be paid. I don't want to discount that.
Yeah, I'll just acknowledge that this is all complicated stuff. Yes. Like what we're asking our organizations to do is to counterbalance, centuries of ways of thinking and everything else that have marginalized and subordinated, people who look like us and women and people who are just different. And so acknowledging that it's complicated, I think what people want at a really high level, they just want to be treated like a human being, just like everybody, just like the others, just like people in the majority. I mean, part of what makes, and I don't know if you all feel this, part of what makes this exhausting work is because every day, to some degree or another, you are fighting for your sense of humanity among others who haven't quite gotten to the place where they can acknowledge the complete humanity of someone who looks like you. And I try not to think of it at that level too much, just for the sake of my sanity.
Yes.
But yeah, different organizations, different companies are engaging. Everyone's heard this analogy of it's a journey, and in reality, I guess it is. And people kind of get on the journey at different places. I think we're all, most of us are headed sort of in the same direction toward trying to figure out this diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging, justice kind of journey. I think some organizations are doing it because they think it's like a hot button thing because of last spring, and they see other organizations in their spheres kind of doing it, and so they're like, okay, yeah, we got to jump into this too. Yeah, I think other organizations really see the benefit and are really getting after it, but yeah, it shouldn't be, but it's complicated, hard, kind of work.
I have one last question that I would like to squeeze in if we can. It's about the Black women and our statistics. So since I was at Wellesley doing social science research, I've always had a pet peeve around how we identify women in statistics. And women's, like any race or ethnicity group, is added in that bucket. But a lot of times we let the statistics of white women skew the statistics for all the women of color in the room. And so when we look at the workplace and we're looking at statistics, I've worked on events and they're like, oh, we need diversity, we'll bring in a white woman, which I understand why we want to track white women's participation in the workforce. But a lot of times that eclipses like having statistics around Black women in workforces. So how can companies who want to put out data around women participation or whatever diversity, how can they make it clear if their statistics for women is highly influenced by like 90% of it's white women, if 3% is Black and 2% Asian and whatever, and the rest like other? How can they start to make it a bit more clear? Because it's not, unless you look at like Black people, then that's when you really get to think about Black women and Black men.
I think they could make it clear by taking a little bit more time to break out what they share. Right? I mean, the reality is some of that historically, and what we see, what companies choose to report, reporting outside of kind of maybe some of the recent kind of efforts to mandate certain activity and certain reporting, but outside of that, right, it's what we see, what research is done, or what companies share with us, right? There are lots of reasons they're sharing it. So if you have collected a bunch of data and you look at your data, and unfortunately, some of your stats aren't that great, but you have a few that are fantastic, right? And maybe you're on that, to Michael's point, you're on a journey, but you don't want people to be discouraged, and then you choose to pick out, that's the thing with science, that's the thing with stats.
Yeah.
Right? They'll tell you what you want them to tell you. So they'll pull out the stats, right? That help us showcase the story. We've made a lot of progress, along these dimensions. Mm-hmm. So it goes to your point. But I think what they have the capability, and now it's like, are they tracking these things? Are they doing that work? And I think probably now we're going to hear from a lot of companies. A lot of companies are now doing even that next step, right? They actually are starting to break down that data and report. It's some, not all.
Well,
right?
that gives me some courage because I haven't seen it yet.
It's starting to happen. And part of it, honestly, I mean, I don't know. Again, I don't want to dominate the piece, but we're talking particularly right now. We're talking about gender, right? But I think actually, and that I think even recently we've just seen even kind of an awakening for how individuals, how companies are even talking about gender, right? And like even for this, you had asked us kind of what are our preferred pronouns, right? So the discourse is shifting. It's becoming a bit more nuanced, advancing, and I think you'll start to see kind of some of that nuance starting to show up in data for some companies. Not all, but I think because the kind of cultural conversation is becoming more nuanced, hopefully we'll see more of that.
Wonderful. I will go ahead.
I was just going to say, this is, I mean, right along the lines, I do have something to plug, and this question seems like a setup, but at Prism Work, we're actually conducting research right now about what the future of the corporate workplace looks like when it's centered on women of color. So we are conducting a survey. We've already done some focus groups and salons. We're going to do a few more after the insights of these surveys. It closes this Sunday, actually. Where if you can take 15 minutes, we want to hear your voice of what does the workplace look like centered on women of color. That's Black women, brown women, Asian, Indigenous. We are women. White women are also welcome to take the survey, but we are trying to make sure that we can construct and develop the narrative when Black women get to tell the story, when Asian women get to tell the story, because as we've discussed earlier, when you can center Black people of color, women of color, all boats rise, everyone rises. So we want to hear the story of what that is. So please, we'd ask you to participate. And
I just dropped the link in the chat for people who want to search that. So we just have 2 minutes left. I want to be respectful of your time because I know you're busy and y'all were gracious enough to donate an hour to us. So wrapping it up, do you all feel hopeful for the future as you look into DE&I space, the work that you're doing? Just like, are you hopeful that it can get better for Black employees, that it could be a safer, more positive work environment?
So I'm going to jump in really quickly just to say that to do this work, you have to be hopeful, otherwise, because again, if you look at the history, the hundreds and years of history of people of African descent in this country, then there's plenty of data, overwhelming data to not be hopeful. So I think people who are in these kinds of roles, you've got to be hopeful, unless you're that rare person who just enjoys banging your head against the wall.
I would agree. I'm definitely hopeful. I mean, I don't know. I listen to and talk to people who are coming into the workplace and questions people ask, the expectations, the demands, right? And I'll call them demands. Like there's a fight for talent right now, right? And it's real. And so all of a sudden you're seeing this topsy-turvy nature where people in the C-suite are like, well, we need to hire. And they're like, what are we going to do? And how are we going to attract great talent? And people coming in saying, well, I'd like to know more about your DEI strategy. How come when I looked at your website, nobody looks like me? And I did a double click. How come you in your report, to your point, you reported these numbers and not these? So people, I think I'm hopeful because I think just starting to see some of a shift in who's driving the conversation.
But real quick, the other thing you've got to look out for is companies who there's lots of diversity, lots of color on the website and in sort of external communications, but it's a very different story internally.
Oh,
so that's the other side of that coin.
Yeah.
We're going to bring that up next year.
That's next year.
Hey, Corey, are you hopeful?
I would just echo, yes, absolutely hopeful. The reason I have hope is because I'm actually sitting in those rooms or in the Zooms. And whereas before I was maybe seeing leaders who would dismiss concepts or ideas, actually, now this is still just as troubling sometimes, but seeing them wrestle with the idea of what new leadership looks like, and they're coming out on the other side of it. So that is what gives me hope in that instance, is that they would continue it and further it, because there are some people that are struggling, that their thinking is getting troubled. And it's making it a better way.
Yeah, we're going against away the grain, the way some people have been thinking. So to wrap it out, how can people follow you all, or their websites, information for the things that y'all are doing that they can look up, things like that? Books, any of that? Yep. This is the time to tell them.
I'm just promoting right now the survey that the link is in there. Please take all women. Please take that survey. You can find any of our information at Prismwork or prismwork.com. My personal handles are at Creative Corey, CREATIVECOREY.
Thank you, Michael.
Since we're having a long name is a problem.
Or you can also drop it in the chat.
I'll have to drop it in the chat because I'm like.
Yeah, for me, you can just find me either on LinkedIn, Michael B. Moore, and I'm at Blackbaud, or for some more creative, political, social stuff, you can go to my site, afrocentric.me.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you all so much for joining us today and wrapping up our second annual Black America Summit. I appreciate you all so much for this wonderful conversation. I learned a lot, and I think our audience gained a lot of really great insight. So thank you again.
Thank you so much for having me. This
was great.
Yeah,
thank
you for the wonderful conversation.
Oh, my pleasure.